Hello, class, and welcome to Interviewing Techniques. My name is Dr. Neil Soggie, and I'm your instructor for this course. This week, we're going to be bringing together many of the themes we've explored throughout the course. And hopefully, this reminds us that interviewing is not just about techniques and skills, it's about who we are. It's about our character as counselors, our way of being as we enter into the client's lived world. Ethical conduct is important, and cultural awareness also forms the foundation for safe, respectful, and effective counseling. So, as we move forward in our work, let's think about that today as we center ourselves on the principles of equity and humility and professional integrity in every client interaction. So, as always, I like to start off with a little story about a key person, and then we'll dive into our themes for this, our last lecture that I will be providing for you on the structure of interviewing techniques. And here I want to kind of cover three main themes. First off, I want to cover some of the core ethical principles in interviewing and counseling, just to kind of remind us of those basics. I also want to remind us about the role of cultural sensitivity in building trust, and also of addressing power and privilege and personal bias. Now, the person that I would like to introduce you to today is Daryl Sue. Born in 1942, he's a psychologist and professor who has really profoundly influenced multicultural counseling. He's done some real significant work on microaggressions and cultural competence and the idea of racial identity development, and has really kind of helped to shape ethical training in the mental health professions. And he urges counselors to move beyond being colorblind or surface level cultural awareness. Instead, he calls for humility, accountability, and ongoing self reflection, even when we are thinking that we're dealing with a client of the same cultural background as us. There's going to be some subtle differences in the lived world, in the understanding, in the cultural expectations. And it's always important for us to be open to whatever that lived world of the client presents to us. And so Sue's legacy is clear. Ethical interviewing is inseparable from cultural sensitivity and from humility. There's a wonderful Greek phrase that I've had some of my trainers in the past say, and it's you need to approach a client with the view of epoche, which basically means I don't know. It's the idea that I don't really know. I might think I know everything about this client's background. We might even share some of the same come from the same community or whatever, but you don't ever really know until you experience that lived world. And so the idea is you're not coming into this with all the answers. You're coming to the lived world being open to what is presented. And that, I think, is beautiful. So what is the counselor's ethical role? As an interviewer and counselor, we do hold power, and clients may feel very vulnerable. In fact, it's very scary to share yourself with someone else. They are going to feel uncertain and mistrustful. And ethical practices means using that power with care and with humility. So the basic principles that we go with are beneficence, which is the idea of you're doing good. Non-malfeasance, which means you are doing no harm. Autonomy, we obviously talked about that a lot. That is about respecting the client's choices. Justice, that means we're promoting fairness in the life of the client. And fidelity, we're keeping their trust. They are sharing things with us and we are keeping that trust. And so these principles guide every conversation that we go through with the client, and that is extremely important. And so it's important to respect confidentiality, respect boundaries. Boundaries are essential for the protection of the client and for our protection. Confidentiality creates safety. It lets the clients know that what can and cannot be kept private. It also helps them to maintain professional boundaries, for us to maintain professional boundaries. And so avoiding things like dual relationships, like conflict of interest, like using our information to get something from the client. None of that is appropriate. Personal disclosures that shift the focus away from the client, that's not appropriate. Boundaries protect the client and the counselor. Very important in this process. So, cultural sensitivity in its practice is essential because culture shapes everything about our identity. It shapes our values and our communication and our family roles and our coping strategies and our views on mental health. And so when we are working with the client, that is not a time to be reinforcing our own cultural beliefs or stereotypes, even if we are of the same culture. It's about drawing upon their understanding of culture and exploring that and finding strengths within that. It's about being curious and ask. You don't assume. So you might ask, are there some cultural beliefs you want me to understand? So you see that so that you can hear their understanding and their experience. Or you could explore, how does your background shape how you see this? That is a good way to ask the question. Cultural humility is more important than cultural expertise. Profoundly important to remember. Humility over expertise. We're never going to know all the answers culturally, but humility keeps us open. It's also important for us to identify our own biases. We all carry unconscious biases. They may relate to race or gender or class or religion or sexual orientation or age or ability, and an effective counselor needs to reflect upon their identities and their assumptions. And when a bias arises, to notice it, to examine it, and return to curiosity. Awareness does not make us unethical, it makes us honest and authentic. So inclusive language in practice, I think, is very important as well. So be mindful of the kind of language you're using. Use inclusive first-person language. Say a person living with addiction, for example, rather than saying an addict. A person is not defined by their addiction, or shouldn't be. Honor chosen names. Honor chosen pronouns. Avoid language that stigmatizes or marginalizes. Your words have power, so use them to affirm the person, not to exclude the person. And when a client's values differ from our own or challenges societal norms, we can explore that. But that's not our job, to make them see the world as we see it. Instead of correcting, maybe explore. So you could ask something like, what does this mean for you and for your family? Or how do you navigate these expectations? When you hold space for complexity without imposing judgment, you are honoring the person. So here's an example of some things that you might want to do when you're exploring ethics and culture. A client might say something along the lines of, my family doesn't believe in therapy. They think I'm weak. And your response to that might be something like, it sounds like you're balancing your healing with your cultural values. That takes courage. Or the client might say, I pray about it, but I still feel stuck. And you might say something like, your spirituality sounds like it gives you strength. And it's okay to also seek support here. So these reflections honor culture and personal meaning. It honors the uniqueness of the person. And that is the thing I want to leave with you as we close out this class. So a few things to just be mindful of as we close out this last class, or this last lecture, is some cultural terms. So cultural humility, what do we mean by that? Well, there hopefully we are lifelong learners of culture. We're committed to continually learning, continually being open and self-evaluating how we relate across cultures and how we relate to people and how we're open to the lived world of other people. When we talk about microaggressions, those are subtle verbal or behavioral slights based upon identity. And you can think quite easily about these. And ethical practice, of course, is behavior that's guided by the ethical principles of caring for our client. They're guided by professional codes that are central to the client welfare and for social justice. So when it comes to what does cultural humility require of counselors? It really requires them to have lifelong self-reflection and openness to learning within life. So as we close out this lecture, I just want to thank you for completing the full arc of interviewing techniques. We've explored empathy and entering the client's lived world. We've explored reflection and being the mirror that can be held up to help the client to understand themselves better. We've explored motivation, which is the core of keeping the client engaged. We've explored autonomy, which is giving the power of choice to the client, which is something that is central to the client's overall well-being, and now ethics in culture. So I believe now that you have the tools that you need. And I thank you for taking the time to work through this course with me. You take care. My name is Dr. Neil Soggie, and I wish you the best. Goodbye.